Hello, everybody. Welcome to my podcast and my YouTube channel. From Darkness to Light Recovery Coaching. And for my podcast, It's a Happier You Leads to a Healthier You. I'm your host. Y'all know who I am by now. I want to thank y'all for joining me for this episode. If you guys like the commentary on YouTube, hit the like, subscribe, and notification button to receive the notification of my videos. If you are on my podcast, you can go to my name, ASH. Y'all know my name by now. And then you'll see all of my podcasts. And also, if you want to be a member of my podcast, if you want to send me letters, if you want to basically something that you're going through and you need advice or anything like that, please go to my email address, asha.mariama01@gmail.com. That's asha.mariama01@gmail.com. And if you also want to be a guest on my podcast, or if you want to do one-on-one coaching with me, you can email me there as well. A little bit about me: I'm a certified recovery life coach. It's all about helping people in their paths, their journeys, and their purpose to a new and better you. And this particular podcast is all about health and wellness. And it's also about going from darkness to light. And the reason that that's important is because a lot of us are in darkness. Okay. A lot of us are unhealthy in multiple different ways, whether it be emotionally, mentally, psychologically, whether it be internal or external health, whether it be financial, whether it be relationships, whether it be financial. It's always something, and spiritual. Everybody is going through something. Now, for people, as far as external, you're going to see it. You're going to see the unhealthiness because you're going to see their weight. You're going to see the bald spots on their hair, facial virus, pimples, glasses. You're literally going to see the flaws and imperfections, which are still a part of healing. But internally, you don't see it. So the reason I have such an issue of this thing when it comes to weight, or when it comes to society's standard of weight, I've come to realize it's both-faced lie. It is. It's a lie on multiple facets. I don't judge my weight on a scale anymore. I don't. I judge it on what I put on in my closet. If my clothes look bigger, then that means I've lost weight, meaning I've lost body mass. A lot of doctors are going to probably be pissed off what I'm getting ready to say. But from somebody who's been going through this, it's not about body weight at this point. It's about body mass. Okay? Because weight, in all honesty, doesn't matter. It's about body mass. And it depends on if it's fat or if it's muscle. And it ain't got nothing to do with weight. And I'm saying this from somebody that just went to the doctor. And I'm going to explain where I'm going with this. Now, when it comes to your health and wellness, the thing that is standing in your way of you being healthy, and y'all gonna be shocked, every single solitary doctor that probably will hear this podcast will probably be in shock what I'm getting ready to say. And I'm saying this because I just went to the ENTs, and the ENT told me something that I always knew, but I didn't think about it. So let me explain my story. I went to the ENTs today because I needed to get my throat checked. I had a hard time swallowing. Stuff was getting stuck in the right side of my throat. I felt this swelling. He stuck this thing down my nose, and when I tell you, he went literally down my whole entire throat. And he said, I'm going to tell you why this is happening to you. And it's something really simple. You're not drinking enough water. He said, what it is, on this side of your neck, there's a gland right here, right? If you don't drink enough water, that gland swells because there's not enough water. So if you're not drinking enough water, you want to know why you're choking? Because you're not drinking enough water. So when you're eating food, you're not drinking behind it. And so it's getting stuck. And it isn't until you eat something and drink something behind it that it's going to push down. Didn't know this. He told me that. He said you have to drink 6 to 8 glasses of something. Now, mind you, he told me no concentrated drinks, meaning no Kool-Aid, no sodas, no carbonated, nothing. I don't even drink sodas now anyway. So that's out. He said I have to drink 4 bottles of water and 2 things of tea. Because I drink tea in the morning, I drink one at night. He said altogether I have to drink 6, whether it be bottled water, whether it be herbal tea, but those are the only things I can drink. Now I can drink cranberry, but it has to be pure cranberry with no sugar. Now, that right there shocked me because I was like, I know something stuck in my throat. He said, no, you weren't lying. It was stuff stuck in your throat. You weren't kidding. But it's just the fact of what you eat, which in terms was messing with my driving. Because you have to understand your thyroid is right here. Your thyroid is what causes your anxiety. I didn't know that either. Mm-hmm. Your thyroid causes your anxiety. It's not mental, it's your thyroid. I didn't know that either. Why? Because what happens is when you're dry, if your thyroid is in any type of pain, it goes here and it goes here. Your thyroid is a thing that connects the mind and the body as far as communication. Okay? So if you, for example, are driving and it hits this part of your neck and it hits it a certain way, it's gonna cause a panic attack. Panic attacks is what tells you that something is wrong. A panic attack happens before a heart attack. Now, if you start to feel something in your chest and it don't feel right, you automatically need to get one of those things to check your heart rate. I got one that I check every day, and I use it every single day. I also have a blood pressure thing that I have that I'm about to start using. So when he told me this, it got me thinking because I looked at a scale and it said 212 pounds. Okay, I'm 212 pounds. I'm not afraid to admit to it. But when I put on my clothes, everything looks big. But yet my weight is 212 pounds. But then I thought about something. Scales are not calibrated for the individual. It's calibrated for everybody. So anybody can step on that scale, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be correct because it's not. Now, I didn't realize how important the thyroid was until I started having thyroid issues. So my thyroid is good. I have no cancer. I ain't knocking on wood, but y'all know what I mean. Knock on wood. Thank the Lord for that. But what I'm finding is that the thing that's making people unhealthy, boy, y'all gonna be in shock. Cause I didn't realize it until I started talking about it. Dopamine. Dopamine is what's making you unhealthy. Your happy place. Y'all are too busy wanting to be happy so bad that you are destroying yourself trying to do it. It's that happy place. It is the most misconceptive, manipulative part of your brain. Dopamine. Dopamine is your addiction. I did not realize this until I was alone and by myself. And the dopamine, I started to get a better understanding of it. Dopamine is what causes your addictions. And I'm not a doctor, but I can say this from my own experience. Because what you're willing to do to keep that dopamine is what your addictions come from. So, for example, what you're willing to do for love, what you're willing to do for happiness, what you're willing to do to be accepted, loved, liked, appreciated, valued, wanted, needed, to be a part of something, to be validated, to be approved of, to be accepted, for somebody to know your worth, and proving something to people. It's also people pleasers, seat fillers, captain save a hole, and build a bears and build a dolls. What you're willing to do for that dopamine is what causes your addictions. So, for example, you met somebody and this person is everything you want, And what you're willing to do to get this person is your addiction. You're addicted to the person and them making you happy. Because if you notice, when everything changes, you'll still stay with the person because you still think eventually you're going to get that happiness. Or when it comes to sex, if somebody gives you great sex, you're going to want it more and more and more and more and more. Dopamine, money, dopamine, all of it, dopamine. And we don't know how to control it. It's time that we start figuring out how to control our dopamine, our happiness. And dopamine is your happy place. And that's the place you want to stay. And you'll do anything to stay there. That's why when it comes to people, that's why when it comes to the love of money, anything that is the love of something or your happiness is your dopamine. So drugs, the same thing. It's just like people that self-medicate, people that basically will be around a bunch of people. Dopamine. That's what it is. It's an addiction. And like I said, all those things are beautiful things. But what makes them an addiction is what you're willing to do for it. Everybody thinks that addiction is just drugs, alcohol, codependency. Nope. Addictions is anything that keeps you in that happy place that you can't let go of. That's why you can't let go of the past. And you know who got me thinking about this? Donald Trump. Donald Trump got me thinking about this because when I heard about what he did as far as the Puerto Rican people and what was allowed to be said about black people, I realized dopamine. Racism is a dopamine. I mean, it's a lot of things. Discrimination is a dopamine. Like I said, the fact that people like to do stuff negative can be a dopamine. Dopamine can be a serial killer that likes to unalive people. It can be somebody schizophrenic. It can be someone that has this obsession with somebody else. Dopamine. Dopamine. And the problem with it is we don't talk about dopamine. We don't talk about the happy place in our brains. We don't talk about it. So what I've learned is there's a balance between happy and sad. Okay? There's happy medium. You got to be here. Both of them got to be here. But if you notice, they're not together, right? Happy, sad. You notice they're not here where they're touching each other, right? Because there's something in the middle that brings them together. If you think about happy and sad, pain. If you think about love and I'm trying to think of a word for love. There's like opposites. There's 120 different emotions, right? 120. Now, in these 120 emotions, they all go together, one and the other. There's also levels of emotions. Now, the first thing that we need to learn, that we need to teach our children is, why are you mad? What are you mad for? Why are you crying for? Now, this is what I used to do to my son, and this is what taught me this. My son got in trouble one day, right? And I got a phone call. And I said, no, let me go back. My son, when he was little, did something that scared the daylights out of me. And this is how I learned how to control my temper. My son was at my friend's house and we had went over there. We told her boyfriend to watch my son until we went next door. We weren't even there 5 minutes. My son was gone. Now, the daycare that he went to, there's a train goes right across the street. He was trying to get to that train. He was determined to get to that train. Soon as we walked out, as soon as we went in her house, he went out the door. We didn't hear him. We up here searching high and low, calling 911. I'm panicking. Where my child at? So we started to go outside, and somebody said he went outside the neighborhood. Her boyfriend managed to find him on the bus, the city bus. We could not get him off the bus because the person would not let him get off their bus. He going back and forth. The people on the bus was like, let him off the bus. If that's his mother, let him off the bus. We waited 4 hours. The police never came. 4 hours. and they finally showed up. I felt bad for them people because they were sitting on the bus. I felt bad for them. And the police said, all you had to do was ask for an ID and ask, is that his mama? So I finally got my child. I was so pissed off. I was so mad. But then I realized he was safe. He's alive and he's still breathing. So yeah, I was panicking. I was crying and so happy that he was safe 28 years later. But still, I was panicking. So when we're panicking, we have all kind of emotions going through our head. And we don't know what's going to happen. But that situation taught me that don't just panic yet. Don't panic until there's no other solution to the problem. So when I started learning emotional intelligence, I learned, should I be upset about this? Absolutely, should I be upset about this? Because my child was on ran away knowing he ain't supposed to go nowhere. But did that really matter? No. I was just happy that he was safe. My mom was like, girl, just be thankful that he's safe. And that's what she told me. She said, just thank God that he's safe. Just thank God that he's alive and well and that you found him, because it could have been worse. Because he could have went out there at that train tracks. And something just said to go down that way. And luckily we found him. But thank God to the bus guy that stopped him. Thank the Lord he let him on the bus until because he probably figured we were trying to find him. So thank God they stayed until we were actually able to find him. But even with breakups, I learned that I have to reevaluate my emotions before I just start going off. I got to ask myself, is it worth me being mad about? Is it worth me even having a conversation about this? Because negative things are done because people choose to do it, or they're manipulated or bamboozled or led astray into it. So what I learned is, when it comes to infidelity, I try to look at it as, why did they do it? I don't care about the fact, I already know why you did it. You did it because you wanted to. So there's no conversation to be had. I don't care why you did it. You did it because you wanted to. And that's the end of the relationship. But what I do is, instead of confronting the person, what I do is I'll wait and I will deal with my emotions by myself and start prepping myself to leave the relationship. That's what I do. There is no conversation. At this point, if we're living together, it's waiting until the lease is up and moving out. Stacking my money, get ready to move out. That way, when it's time, I'm out that door. I don't want to have a conversation. Because while he out here cheating, I'm already dealing with my emotions and how I'm going to get out. So I ain't going to say nothing until it's time for me to leave. And then when he come home and everything is gone, and I tell him, you got the last day, you need to get your stuff up out, or it's going to get thrown out. That right there lets them know that I'm not kidding at this point. So when it comes to even with domestic violence, you got to let go of the emotions. And when you walk out, the emotions got to walk out when you walk out. So you have to deal with those emotions prior to confronting somebody you about to let go of. There is no point of asking yourself why this person did what they did. Because they did it, because they chose to, and because they wanted to. No other reason than that. Because unless somebody put a gun to their head and told them they had to do it, then that's a whole nother situation. But even you being drunk, there's no excuse. At the end of the day, emotional intelligence and mental intelligence is something a lot of people need to learn. It is one thing that should be taught in class, but it's not. I decided to teach it because I feel like it needs to be taught. So throughout this podcast, I will be teaching about emotional intelligence in different aspects. So all of my podcasts for this season coming is going to be about emotional intelligence, because that's what it's going to be like. But back to dopamine. It still go back to your dopamine. So just like you take some medication and you have a reaction to it, your body's going to do three things. Either it's going to accept it, reject it, or be addicted to it. One of the three. So when it comes to dopamine, if it like it, it's going to continue to want it. So that's why you have food addictions, sex addiction, people addictions, aka obsessions. You have an addiction to proving something to people, being accepted. All them 13 things I said: love, like, appreciate, valued, wanted, need to be part of something, be validated, to be approved of, that thing. That's your addiction. And that's where all your addictions center from. Your dopamine. Your addictions stream from that. Because you will jeopardize your health. You will jeopardize your life. You will jeopardize everything. You will go against everything that is right to do something wrong for them things I just said. That's where your addiction comes from. It comes from that, what you're willing to do for it. You will destroy your body for it, your finance for it, your children for it. You'll destroy any and everybody to get what you want, and that's dopamine. It's just like people that steal, that's an addiction. People that are basically love of money, addiction. It's an addiction. Because what you're willing to do for it is what makes it an addiction. Now, if you say you want to be able to survive and you want money for the purpose of being able to come and go as you please, to be able to travel, to be able to have a carefree life, that's not an addiction. That's a want. Now, your need is your health and wellness. Everything you do should be centered around your health and wellness and how it's going to impact your health, which is something that we don't talk about. Even doctors don't talk about it. So when I learned that about this, I said, okay, I got water sitting over there. I got a new prescription of acid reflux medication. So also, let's talk about inflammation. Everything, all your diseases and illnesses start down in your stomach. That's just where it starts. So I'm sure there will be some doctors that will probably look into this and probably be like, I never thought about it that way. But I am going to write a book about this. But I decided to show y'all that I can tell you about dopamine and how dopamine can be an addiction. So I'm going to share my screen on YouTube, and we're going to talk about dopamine, and we're going to talk about the cravings and the pursuits. And this is from a doctor. Now, mind you, I am using this video for educational purposes only. I am using this as a way to show people where the addictions and the where your addictions come from and why I'm saying what I'm saying. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to mute myself on YouTube because I want y'all to be able to see the video. And then I'm going to come back with my commentary. But this person has been studying dopamine for quite some time. And shout outs to this creator because, like I said, we need to understand dopamine and what dopamine means and how people manipulate your dopamine. Because if you learn about your dopamine and you learn about the importance of it and you learn how to stop looking for the things I said earlier in other people and finding them within yourself, you won't have to worry about it. If you find your own happiness, your own health and wellness and what works for you, then you won't be looking for it elsewhere because you'll find it within yourself. Now, let's me mute myself and let's listen to this video.
So let's think about dopamine peaks and baselines. And let's remember that for every peak, there's a trough. What do I mean by that? Well, when you have a wave, you also have the bottom of the wave. When you have a mountain, you have the bottom of the mountain. When we think about dopamine peaks and dopamine baselines, we have to include that trough because that trough, that is the level of dopamine below baseline, really dictates whether or not you are going to feel motivated to pursue something or not. So I'm going to give you a visual in your mind. The visual in your mind is an increase in dopamine that's triggered by your desire for something, and really could be your desire for anything. If you're hungry and you're thinking about, I really want a sandwich, I really want a, let's think, what sandwich would I want right now? A really nice roast beef sandwich on sourdough with a slice of Swiss, tomatoes, slice of pickle. Here I'm describing the sandwich that I would want. So if you're hungry and you're thinking about that, dopamine starts rising. This is crucially important to understand. Dopamine is not just released when we get the reward, when we get the thing that we're pursuing. Dopamine is released in anticipation of what we want. That increase in dopamine is by no happenstance, no mistake, relates also to our propensity and desire to move. Remember earlier I told you there's a separate circuit of dopamine that triggers movement, and that when it's depleted is causing things like deficits in movement related to Parkinson's or other movement disorders. Well, that's not pure coincidence. That's because desire and the need to move in order to pursue and reach goals are one and the same process. So if I desire a sandwich, or I desire a cup of coffee, or I desire some water when I'm thirsty, there's an increase in dopamine that we could call a little mini peak in dopamine. But then here's the key thing. Very soon after I realize my desire for something, that peak that was caused by the desire comes down and drops below baseline, below the level of dopamine that it was prior to even thinking about the sandwich or the coffee or the glass of water. And it's that drop below baseline that triggers my desire to go out and find that sandwich, that coffee, that water, or that blank. Insert whatever it is that you happen to desire, action or substance of any kind or person, etc. So that drop below baseline is fundamental to the whole process. And that drop below baseline was triggered by the preceding peak. So let's say that I desire a sandwich, there's an increase in dopamine, then very quickly it comes down below baseline just a little bit. Now I'm in pursuit of the sandwich. I'm looking for where I can get that sandwich. I can order it perhaps to be delivered. I can go out and find it. Now is the stage in which I have to think about what are the different stimuli, that is the things in my environment that signal whether or not I'm likely to get that sandwich or not. Okay, so for instance, if I were to go to my phone and order food on an app or walk down the street and see the sign for a deli, that's a cue that I'm likely to relieve that drop in dopamine and get not just back to baseline, but that I'll get a peak in dopamine. And indeed, that's what happens. If I find that deli, I go into the deli, they're open, they're making the sandwich that I want, they make my sandwich, and great, I get that sandwich. And that sandwich will have some degree of inherent reward to it, some degree of my liking it or not liking it. So let's say I like it. It's not the best sandwich I've ever had, but all I'm doing is comparing my desire for that sandwich to the sandwich that I actually got and ate. And chances are it's going to relieve that craving, meaning it will take that dopamine that had fallen below baseline up, back to baseline. And if I like the sandwich, it's going to indeed increase that dopamine again to another peak.
Let's talk about that for a minute, shall we? Because I feel like that's something we need to talk about. Okay. When it comes down to dopamine, it's no different than when you have sex. When you have sex, there's an all-time high. And then when you don't have sex, it's all-time low, which is the reason why you'll see a lot of people that's craving sex and are craving attention, and they're craving somebody, pick me, pick me. That's dopamine. It's an addiction. Because just like he said, I may get the sandwich and it may not even been worth getting the sandwich in the first place, but because I really want that sandwich, I went and got it, and it doesn't matter whether it's healthy for me or not. I just went and got it, not thinking about, is this sandwich something I should get, or should I get a sandwich but get something that's more healthier? See, our dopamine is what controls everything. So that's the reason you're not thinking about it. The only thing you're thinking about is your dopamine said, I want a sandwich. Your mind is like, okay. So you go get it, because dopamine doesn't think, it just feels. It's a feeling. So your dopamine ain't nothing but feelings. It's just like when you want somebody to care about your feelings, that's still an addiction. When you want somebody to listen to you, that's still an addiction. Because what you're willing to do to get the person to listen to you is what makes it an addiction. So what I need people to understand is addictions are not just I wanted to do drugs. You can be manipulated into doing drugs. Yeah. Peer pressure into doing anything. But when you continue it, it's no longer peer pressure. Now it's an addiction because you like the way it makes you feel. You like how it makes you feel when you eat them sugar cookies you ain't supposed to be eating. You like the way it makes you feel when you are having somebody give you affection, when you want to cuddle. And so for a lot of people that don't feed into their dopamine, they don't understand that. People that are emotionally intelligent are not going to understand why you want to cuddle. So you have people that don't feed into their emotions like that. So when you're dating someone that's not emotionally available, that's because they don't want it from you. They want it, just not from you. So even though you're all the things this person wants, but because physically you ain't that, he's just not into you. Still dopamine. He still want it, just not from you. So it's not that people don't want things or even need things. They just don't want it from you. So even though they may want somebody to cook and clean, dopamine is I physically want a woman that's drop dead gorgeous, got a banging body to cook and clean and serve and do all these other things. But your dopamine doesn't care about what she looks, but your mind doesn't care about what she looks like. Your heart doesn't care about what she looks like. But as long as that person is catering to those feelings, catering to your emotions, catering to all of that, your dopamine is happy. But the minute that it's not, you move on to somebody else. That's why people move on the way they do. Because you're looking for something that's not going to last. Emotions don't last, and they don't. But you expect this person to be the same person they were when you met them. No. And that's why people can't accept change. Because dopamine, you're used to what's familiar. And the one thing dopamine is scared of the most is something that is the unknown, something that you're not used to, that you're not comfortable with. And that's why your dopamine keeps you in this complacent place where you're going to stay in the same place and you're not going to grow and evolve because dopamine doesn't want you to do that. Dopamine wants you to feel and stay in that comfort zone and just stay there. So I just wanted to say that, but let's continue.
Now, if I love the sandwich, like it's the most delicious thing that I've ever tasted in my entire life, well, then I'll get a big peak in dopamine when I consume that reward. However, chances are that the sandwich is more or less as I expect it to be, which is pretty good. I'll eat it and I'm fine. What do I mean by fine? Well, there's a concept called reward prediction error. Reward prediction error says that the dopamine that it is experienced, that's released from the VTA and nucleus accumbens, is going to be of a certain value. And that value is going to be compared to the desire and expectation of what I thought I was going to get. So if you take what you actually got minus what you expected, that's reward prediction error. So if the sandwich is basically what I expected to get, fine, dopamine comes down basically to a baseline level that's pretty standard for me and is basically the baseline level I had before I ever thought about the sandwich at all. If the sandwich completely surprises me and is completely amazing, just an amazing sandwich, well then the level of dopamine that I experience when I consume that sandwich is going to be even greater, and it's going to be that minus what I expected. So there, it's a bigger reward prediction error in the direction of higher peak by consuming the sandwich. And then, of course, there's the other possibility, which is the deli's closed, or the sandwich they make me is lousy or doesn't taste good, or something happened in the consuming of that sandwich that just makes it a bad experience. In which case, if we take that reward experienced minus reward predicted from the initial craving, well, then it's going to be less than what I expected. And therefore, the baseline drops below where it was prior to even desiring the sandwich. Okay, so all of this might seem a little bit complicated, but it's all very simple. Desire for things increases dopamine, but then our level of dopamine drops below baseline, and it's that drop below baseline that triggers the motivation to bring that dopamine level back up by going and pursuing the thing that you wanted in the first place. Now, of course, as this is happening, you're not conscious of your dopamine levels. You experience this as context-dependent craving and pursuit. Because remember, the prefrontal cortex is involved in context setting and craving and pursuit because it relates to action and movement, which is one of the general features of the dopamine system. So you can start to see how this is a beautifully designed system. And you can also see how it's a perfect system for desire and pursuit of anything, not just sandwiches, as I'm giving you in this somewhat trivial but everyday and therefore applicable example.
Okay, so now y'all understand why y'all chase behind things that you do. Dopamine. Dopamine is what causes your addictions because once it lowers, you want to keep that dopamine up. And it's just a sensation, something that you've never felt or experienced before, and you want to continue to do it. It's just like people that go on cruises. It's just like people that travel a lot. It's just like people that get on roller coasters. Dopamine, that excitement, that thrill. That's what dopamine is. And it's a great feeling, but it's not a permanent feeling. The problem is you want something that is temporary to be permanent. And that's the reason why relationships and marriage don't last, because if you can't keep the dopamine up in the marriage, then it's going to fall. It's going to crash. Which is why people are out here committing infidelity, because your dopamine, that's just what it is, unfortunately. So I wanted to play that because I felt like it's something that we need to do. So when it comes to dopamine, it's you definitely have to be very, very careful of that, because it can turn into an addiction. So dopamine, you definitely got to be very careful of that, because that dopamine can cause an addiction. It can cause a lot of problems. It can cause a lot of different situations that can go very wrong. So when it comes to your dopamine, sometimes you can overdo it. Sometimes you can do too much of it. So there's another video that talks about serotonin versus dopamine, the difference between pleasure and happiness. Now I'm gonna play this because I feel like I need to play it. Give me a second. I'm gonna mute this first while I go to the commercial. So I think it's important that we understand about the addictions when it comes to dopamine. And I really want people to understand there is a difference. But yes, there are several different types of pleasure and happiness that we need to discuss. And there also is an addiction when it comes to the rise and fall of dopamine. So, what I'm going to do, because I love y'all so much, I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to talk about it. Because, like I said, there is an addiction when it comes to dopamine. And dopamine is what causes your addictions, and it just does. So, like I said, that's why I like using these videos, because I don't want to just get on here and talk about these things and I have nothing to back it up. I want to make sure I have something that backs up what it is that I'm saying, because for that very reason. Which is one thing I love about Facebook, because Facebook will actually reach out to the actual person whose videos that you're using or music and ask, is it okay? And I thank God I've been blessed for people to say it's okay for me to use their music and it's okay for me to use their videos on Facebook anyway. But I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about this when it comes to happiness, because I want people to understand how this affects your health and wellness, because it absolutely does. So again, this video I am using as well as far as for educational purposes when it comes to recovery and healing. And this is information we definitely need to look at. So let me go ahead and mute myself and we'll get started.
Dopamine is the learning neurotransmitter. It is the positive reinforcement neurotransmitter. It is the transmitter that says, this feels good, I want more. Now, serotonin is the opposite. It's the neurotransmitter that says, this feels good, I don't want or need anymore. Those are clearly two different things. And the problem is, if you don't know the difference, then you are basically subject to continuing to try to reward yourself ad nauseum. Now, there's a third component to this pathway that is absolutely essential, and it's called cortisol. So cortisol is the stress hormone. And what cortisol does, which is particularly important in this story, is it works on this part of your brain right here, the part right behind your forehead, the part right above your eyes, called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that keeps you from doing stupid things. I call it the Jiminy Cricket part of your brain, like from Pinocchio. Bottom line, if you have a dysfunctional prefrontal cortex, you can't see the future. You only live for the moment. Prefrontal cortical dysfunction is what turns a human into a lizard. Okay? Doesn't matter what happens in the future. I need my reward now. And so there's no ability to cognitively inhibit that feeling of reward. And that then drives the dopamine even faster. And ultimately, that's what leads to neuronal cell death.
Let's have this conversation because that's true. James Scott Farron, I want my money and I want it now. It's just like the obsession when it comes to your body and when it comes to your weight. You want everything to happen now when it doesn't work like that. It's not on my time, your time, it's on God's time. There are a lot of people that sit up here and they lose weight really, really fast and then end up sicker than what they were when they had the weight on them. Or they lose the weight and then they can't keep the weight off. And because you can't keep the weight off, you're going through this deep dark depression versus just saying, I love the body that I'm in and I'm going to figure out ways to lose weight. So let me give you an example. I have inflammation and the doctor said, luckily it's not as bad. But guess what I got to do? I got to stop eating foods that cause inflammation and have my glucose levels up high. My cholesterol and all that is wonderful. But inflammation is something that I'm struggling with. Now they got me taking some medication. I got to start taking it and sitting over there and I got to get ready to take it before I go to bed. And then tomorrow I'll start taking it every morning. But no, I take the other ones and I take that one at night. But at the end of the day, is it going to be easy for me to give up all of the things that make me happy, far as food wise? No, it's going to be hard. It's going to be absolutely hard. But then again, it's not because I've been doing it already. It's just the fact that I have to stay away from starch. I got to stay away from a lot of sugars. Doesn't mean I can't have these things occasionally. I just can't have as much of it as I would like to. And I'm okay with that, which means it's going to be a meat, in other words, keto diet. But what I have to do is I have to eat majority of vegetables and fruit and then eat maybe once a week, maybe have rice. Or if I have rice, it's got to be brown rice or it's got to be healthier rice, which there is. But when we have people that are taking out all the nutrients and contaminating our food, then that's where we have a problem at. So yeah, sometimes you got to go against your dopamine and say to yourself, even though I love this, I can't eat it because it's not good for me. Same thing about McDonald's. Me and my mom were talking today and I was telling her that after 5 o'clock, I can't eat after 5. So when I go home after 5 o'clock, I can't eat during the week. Why? Because I gotta stop eating 3 hours before I go to bed. Just like when I got home, I just ate some and I'm not eating nothing else the rest of the night. I ain't doing nothing but drinking water. I can't even drink tea before I go to bed. Because normally I drink tea before I go to bed. Nope, it's just water. So in the morning, I got to have between now and when I wake up in the morning, I got to have water. When I go and, sometime when I have lunch, I got to have water. I got to have water sometime in between. So in other words, I'm going to be drinking 4 bottles of water plus 2 things of tea a day. So everything I drink has to be no sugar, which is going to be okay with me because I can find things that have no sugar in it and no concentrate, which means no Kool-Aid, no anything that's concentrate. I can't drink it. Okay, that's why I bought teas. That's why I buy tea now. That's all I drink. I don't even, I get cranberry juice, but and maybe pomegranate juice, but I have to make sure it's not concentrated. That's why I'm about to get another juicer and just start juicing and drinking it that way. That way I don't have to worry about that issue of it being concentrated. So I'm really excited about this new journey that I'm on. But again, is it going to be easy? Nope, because I'm going to be wanting them Pop-Tarts. And I bought some. But they going to, if I have low sugar, that's the only time I'll eat them. So I may not eat no more Pop-Tarts until maybe when my sugar goes low again. But you got to do what you got to do to be healthy. So it's not just about what y'all think it is. It's about being able to manage your dopamine and those cravings that you got and replacing them with something better. So you have to let your cortex and the other part of your brain take over your dopamine. Because that dopamine is going to get you in a lot of trouble. That dopamine is the thing that's going to have you out here doing things you ain't got no business doing. So let's continue. Just wanted to say that. Let's continue the video.
So it's the combination of dopamine and cortisol that leads to addiction. So reward is good. Reward plus stress is not. And that's what we all are now, is chronically stressed. And so chronic stress makes you want reward because of this lizard brain. And so it sets you up for addiction. Now, on the other side, on the serotonin side, chronic stress also, and cortisol has an effect as well. So serotonin does bind to its receptor to inhibit the next neuron. The problem is that the serotonin receptor is downregulated by cortisol. So less serotonin, fewer receptors, that's depression. So addiction and depression both occur, one due to dopamine, one due to lack of serotonin, but in the presence of cortisol, in the presence of chronic stress. So chronic stress is what belies both of these two major afflictions of the human condition. There is one reward system. One. Now, that reward system is pretty darn important. If you don't receive reward, you don't get out of bed. You actually lie in bed and die, is what happens. And that's been done in transgenic animals. They've basically, knocked out the reward system, and those animals have no will to live. Okay, you need reward to be able to get up in the morning, go to work, make a living, bring home a paycheck, eat food, etc. All right?
All right, y'all, let's talk about it because this is true. That's why people are committing suicide because they feel like they have no will to live. So if you have kids that all they do is make straight A's, all they do is study, and if they lose, that's like if you lose something, whether it's a game or whether it's a spelling bee, why you're so upset because of that dopamine, you lost. Now, what I've learned about, the serotonin is that when it comes to stress, this is why I don't get upset when people run off at the mouth because I don't see the point in doing that. I'm not letting you mess up my serotonin to let my dopamine just have me doing something that's going to mess me up. Because your dopamine is what controls your emotions anyway. So when you learn to control that and saying, I'm not going to let this get to me, I'm not going to let it bother me. The one thing about negative people and the reason they get mad is because when you are not paying attention to them, when you're not responding to them the way they want you to respond, which is the reason why God says to love thy enemy the way I love you. That's why that's important. So when you don't allow negative people to stress you out, when you let go of the emotions when that person walk out the door, then you're not bringing back those feelings, then you can move on. You can't move on if you still got feelings for that person. I don't care if they're negative or positive, you still have feelings for that person, and that is unhealthy. So you have to understand, if you learn how to control your emotions and learn how to think positive, even in the most darkest of situations, then your serotonin is going to outdo your dopamine. Because now, if you really got a will to live, then you're going to be easily cutting out a lot of things that don't serve you. So if it don't help your health and wellness, then you shouldn't be dealing with it at all. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. So let's continue.
So reward is survival of the species. You cannot do it without reward. However, reward and contentment are not the same thing. Reward and pleasure are synonymous. Contentment and happiness are synonymous. So people in our society have confused and conflated these two concepts, pleasure and happiness. So I find that there are 7 differences between the two. And people need to understand these differences in order to be able to make head or tail of, number 1, the world, and number 2, how they're being manipulated by the world in order to make them miserable. So those 7 things, so the 7 differences. 1, pleasure is short term, like a meal. Happiness is long term, like a lifetime. 2, pleasure is visceral. You feel it in your body. Happiness is ethereal. You feel it above the neck.
Let's talk about that. See, a lot of y'all are mixing up pleasure and happiness. Y'all think they go together. Happiness is what you find in you, okay? It's how you feel about yourself, how you think about yourself. Happiness is when you do things that you think that happiness is what you do as far as the things you enjoy. No, that's pleasure. Pleasure is doing something you enjoy because it's temporary. Happiness is forever. So if no matter what you go through, no matter what you deal with, you know there's a light at the end of the tunnel, then that's happiness. If you accept your flaws and imperfections and the mistakes you made in your past and you come to terms with it and you've made amends to all the people that you've wronged, then you're going to be happy no matter what. Whether it's good or bad, you're going to find a way out of it. And while you're sitting still, you're actually doing something. So even though you may be sick, but that don't mean you ain't doing nothing. Because when you get better, you're like, okay, what am I going to do when I get better? It's just like the time that you're sitting there and you're healing and you're trying to get through having a baby, you got time to actually heal. Instead of trying to get up and always do something, sometimes you need to sit your butt down. Because what pleasure's going to do is going to have you overdoing it and doing things that may jeopardize your life. So I just want to say that right quick, but let's continue.
3, pleasure is taking, like from a casino. Happiness is giving, like Habitat for Humanity. Number 4, pleasure is achieved alone, like a chocolate cake. Happiness is achieved in social groups, like a birthday party. Number 5, pleasure is achievable with substances, like, for instance, cocaine, heroin. Happiness is not achievable with substances. Number 6, the extremes of pleasure, whether it be substances or behaviors. So substances like cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol, sugar, or behaviors. So shopping, gambling, social media, internet, gaming, pornography. Okay. In the extreme are addictive. There's an aholic after every one of those. Shopaholic, sexaholic, alcoholic, chocoholic, etc. But there's no such thing as being addicted to too much happiness. And number 7, and perhaps the most important for this conversation, pleasure is dopamine and happiness is serotonin. So 2 different neurotransmitters, 2 different areas of the brain, 2 different regulatory pathways, 2 different mechanisms of action, 2 different drivers. So you say, like, so what? Why do we care? Here's why we care. Dopamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter. When dopamine binds to its receptor, the next neuron gets excited. Okay? Postsynaptic receptor activation. Now, neurons like to be excited. Neurons like to be tickled, but they don't like to be bludgeoned. Chronic overstimulation of any neuron in the body leads to neuronal cell death. Okay? And the reason is because neurons are so metabolically active and neurotransmission is so metabolically taxing that if you just keep it up and keep it up and keep it up, that neuron is basically going to exhaust and die. And so the postsynaptic neuron that has the dopamine receptors on it, it has a fail-safe. It has a protective mechanism in order not to be overwhelmed. What it does is it downregulates the dopamine receptor. So now that, even though you have lots of ligands, lots of dopamine molecules, you have fewer receptors, which means there's less chance that any molecule will find the receptor. And what that means in human terms is you need more and more to get less and less. And that's the phenomenon we call tolerance. So dopamine leads to tolerance. And then when those neurons actually do start to die, that's called addiction. Now, serotonin, this other neurotransmitter, is not excitatory. It's inhibitory. Now, if you're inhibitory and if you're inhibiting the next neuron, do you need to downregulate the receptor? No, because the neuron's not going to die because it's not being overexcited. It's being, if anything, over-inhibited. All right? So there's no such thing as overdosing on too much happiness. But there's one thing that downregulates serotonin, dopamine. So the more pleasure you seek, the more unhappy you get. And if you don't know the difference between reward and contentment, if you don't know the difference between pleasure and happiness, and you are led astray by, say, Coca-Cola, open happiness, or, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, or, any of these other, sort of memes and mantras that have entered our, collective lexicon about the fact that you want to, quote, get happy by taking this substance, you are sadly mistaken, and ultimately it will do a number on you. And it's been doing a number on hundreds of millions of people, in particular over the last 50 years, as public relations and and now the internet have come into the fore.
Sorry, y'all on YouTube. This is why I use videos. I think it's important that people get to see or listen to other people that are pretty much saying the same thing. So serotonin and dopamine are very different. For me, I depend more on my serotonin than I do dopamine. It's easier for me to walk away from things and people that don't serve me mentally. And don't get me wrong, love is a great thing. But the one thing I disagreed with was when he said that dopamine is more so for being alone. I think it's the opposite. I think serotonin is more so for people being alone, and dopamine is more so for the ones that have to have people around them. Because the addiction to people is why I say dopamine has a lot to do with that. The fact that people want love, to be liked, to be appreciated, to be valued, to be wanted, to need it, to be part of something, those things is dopamine. For people that don't want that, I think it's more serotonin. It's more so that if I don't have a use for you or a need for you, or you're not someone that has proven your worth to me. In other words, people that are more so mental don't like having these flimsy conversations. They want to have conversations about things that matter. They don't want to be looked at based upon what they look like. They want to be looked at based upon their intellect and who they are as people and their character, not by what they look like. But on the flip side of that, you got people that want to look at how somebody looks, and that's how they judge people based upon that. So I just wanted to come on here and talk about this because I felt like it was something that was important that I share with you all, not only on my YouTube and my other channels, but also on my podcast, because dopamine is really your addiction, and that's where it comes from. And what you're willing to do for it is based on the levels of the dopamine. And I love the fact that these two gentlemen actually talk about this, because even when I was working with the person I was working with in her company, we never talked about dopamine like that. So, I mean, at the end of the day, like I said, I wanted to come on here and have this conversation. So, even though now a few people only saw this, who knows? Later on down the line, a whole lot of people might see this. But my point is, it's not about me having a bunch of people. That's not what this is about. This is about the ones that really want to learn about recovery and healing on a permanent basis. So if you can control your dopamine as far as not thinking that that's your happy place, that's just your pleasure. I talk about it all the time in my Kama Sutra. And that's why I said Kama Sutra is not even about sex, is not even about thinking, it's just about pleasure. It's about the way it makes you feel, but a lot of people don't even understand that either. They don't. So I think if we start teaching kids about dopamine and getting them to understand and how to basically not feed into that as much. And don't get me wrong, it ain't nothing wrong with feeling good. You do want to feel good in what you do, and you want to do what makes you happy. But don't get happiness mixed up with pleasure, because they're two different entities. They're two different things. Because, like I said, happiness is a lifetime. Because if you're happy within yourself, then the only thing that somebody doing is adding to your life. Pleasure, you have to have people around you all the time. Why? I do not know. But people just got to have people around them all of the time. So I just wanted to come on here and do this podcast. And so I hope you guys learn from it, grow from it, evolve from it, elevate from it. I know I was supposed to do this yesterday, but I was sick yesterday, so I didn't. And plus, I got to drink my water because I'm starting to get a little parched. So I got to drink the rest of that water. And then tomorrow, it's my first thing in the morning. I drink water and don't eat nothing, just drink water. And then I'll drink again some water. I'll probably drink some tea, and then I'll drink some water. And then before I go to bed, I'll drink some. I may not drink no water before I go to bed, but if I get up in the middle of the night, I'm parched, I'm just gonna get some water. So yeah, this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna love this new journey that I'm on, but hey, it is what it is. If I care about my health, then this is what I gotta do. So again, once you get your dopamine in check, you're gonna realize how important your health and wellness is, and you're gonna start having that emotional intelligence. So you're not just gonna feed into your dopamine, because even though there's a lot of things you don't want to do, if it's gonna make you healthy, then you ain't got no choice but to do it. You just got to find the happiness in it and find the pleasure in it. So that being said, I thank y'all for joining me for this episode. I'm your host, Goddess Asha Mariama, on podcast. And for those of y'all on YouTube, I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. Without y'all, there's no me. And I will see y'all later. Bye.